Maya Reeves stood at the edge of the weathered dock, her toes curled over the splintered wood as she gazed across the still lake. The water mirrored the evening sky, a canvas of deep purples and fading oranges that seemed to stretch into forever. This place had been her sanctuary since childhood, a hidden corner of the world where time moved differently. But today, not even the tranquility of lakeside could quiet the storm inside her. The diagnosis had come 3 days ago, stage 3 breast cancer. The same disease that had taken her mother 20 years earlier, when Maya was only 12. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent her entire adult life running from this very shadow, convinced that if she didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't find her. Yet here it was, having tracked her down despite her best efforts to outpace it. A cool breeze stirred the surface of the lake, sending ripples across its glassy face. Maya wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, watching as the ripples expanded outward. That's how life worked, she thought. One small disturbance and suddenly everything changed. I thought I'd find you here. The voice behind her was familiar, warm and rich like honey. Maya didn't turn around immediately. She knew it was her sister Olivia, 2 years younger but somehow always seeming decades wiser. Gran said you disappeared after breakfast, Olivia continued, settling beside Maya on the dock. Their shoulders touched, a small comfort in the growing chill of evening. She's worried. I needed to think, Maya replied, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a lot to process. Olivia nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Unlike Maya, who had inherited their father's olive complexion and dark curls, Olivia was fair like their mother, pale skin and strawberry blonde hair that caught the dying sunlight. They were opposites in so many ways, yet connected by invisible threads that had only strengthened after their mother's death. You haven't told her yet, have you? Olivia asked. Maya shook her head. How can I? Gran's 82. She's already buried her daughter. I can't. Her voice caught, the words sticking in her throat like burrs. I can't make her go through that again. This isn't 20 years ago, Maya. Treatment options have improved. Survival rates are higher. This isn't a death sentence. But it felt like one. Maya had seen what cancer had done to their mother, watched her wither away over 18 excruciating months until she was a hollow shadow of herself. The memories were seared into Maya's mind. The sterile hospital rooms, the acrid smell of chemicals, the way her mother's skin had turned ashen and paper-thin near the end. I should have been more vigilant, Maya said, guilt creeping into her voice. I knew the family history. I knew the risks. I convinced myself it wouldn't happen to me. Olivia's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. You can't blame yourself. And you can't face this alone either. Maya finally turned to look at her sister. I'm not telling James. James, her husband of 7 years. The man who had promised to stand by her through sickness and health. The man who just last month had told her he wasn't sure he loved her anymore. Olivia's expression hardened. He's still your husband. For how much longer? Maya asked, bitterness tinging her words. We barely speak. He's been sleeping in the guest room since March. The only thing keeping us together is inertia, and maybe a little fear of what comes next. The truth was, Maya's marriage had been unraveling for years. The cracks had appeared gradually, so slight at first that they were easy to ignore. A canceled dinner plan here, a forgotten anniversary there. Conversations that grew shorter, silences that stretched longer. Then came the emotional distance that felt as vast as the lake before them. Cancer has a way of clarifying things, Olivia said softly. Maybe this is an opportunity to. To what? Maya interrupted, suddenly angry. To guilt him into staying? To make him play the devoted husband while he secretly counts down the days until he's free? No thank you. The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving only a faint glow on the horizon. The lake had turned dark, its surface no longer reflective but absorptive, swallowing what little light remained. I'm moving back to Gran's, Maya announced, the decision crystallizing in her mind as she spoke the words. I can commute to treatments from here. I can breathe here. Olivia didn't argue. Instead, she squeezed Maya's hand tighter, a silent pledge of support. We should head back, she said after a moment. It's getting cold. Maya nodded but made no move to stand. Give me a few more minutes. I'll be right behind you. After Olivia left, Maya remained on the dock, watching as stars began to puncture the darkening sky. She thought about the treatment plan the oncologist had outlined: surgery followed by chemotherapy, then radiation. A year of her life dedicated to fighting, to suffering, to hoping. A year that would reshape her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. But first she had to tell Gran. And then she had to tell James that she was leaving, not because of the cancer, but because their marriage had become a hollow shell long before the diagnosis. The thought of these conversations made her stomach clench with anxiety, but she knew they were necessary steps on the path ahead. As the last light faded from the sky, Maya stood and turned toward the silhouette of her grandmother's house on the hillside above the lake. Its windows glowed with warm yellow light, a beacon guiding her home. She took a deep breath and began to walk. Gran's kitchen hadn't changed in decades. The same yellow curtains hung above the sink, the same wooden table dominated the center of the room, and the same collection of mismatched teacups filled the open shelves along one wall. It was a place frozen in time, and Maya found comfort in its constancy. "I was beginning to think you decided to sleep at the lake," Gran said, not looking up from the dough she was kneading on the countertop. Flour dusted her forearms and speckled her silver hair, giving her an otherworldly appearance in the soft kitchen light. Maya sat at the table, watching her grandmother's hands work the dough with practiced precision. At 82, Eleanor Reeves still moved with purpose and vigor, refusing to yield to the limitations her age might otherwise impose. She had raised her two granddaughters after their mother died, and their father disappeared into his grief, eventually leaving altogether. Gran had been their rock, their safe harbor. "I have something to tell you," Maya said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Gran's hands stilled, but she didn't turn around immediately. When she did, her face was composed, but her eyes, deep blue and startlingly clear, revealed her concern. "Is this about you and James?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she moved to sit across from Maya. "Partly," Maya admitted. "But there's more." The words came slowly at first, then in a rush: the diagnosis, the treatment plan, her decision to leave James and move back to Lakeside. Gran listened without interruption, her weathered hands folded tightly on the table before her. When Maya finished speaking, silence filled the kitchen. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the night. "I always knew you'd come home eventually," Gran said finally, her voice steady. "I just didn't expect it would be like this." Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Im skarat, Gran." "Of course you are," Gran replied, reaching across the table to take Maya's hand. "Only a fool wouldn't be. But fear doesn't have to define you. Your mother was terrified, but she never let it steal her joy. Not for a single day." The mention of her mother sent a familiar ache through Maya's chest. "I don't know if I'm as strong as she was." Grans grip dictanat. Strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about moving forward despite the fear. And you won't be doing it alone. "James might contest the divorce," Maya said, changing the subject slightly. "He's been talking about wanting children lately. I think he's having some kind of midlife crisis." "And you never wanted children?" Gran asked, though she already knew the answer. Maya shook her head. "I decided long ago that I wouldn't risk passing on this legacy." She gestured vaguely toward her chest. "I couldn't bear the thought of leaving a child motherless, the way Mom left us." Gran's expression softened. "That's your fear talking, not your heart." Perhaps it was, Maya conceded silently. But fear had been a constant companion for so long that it was difficult to separate from her authentic desires. Had she really not wanted children, or had she simply been too afraid to want them? The line had blurred over the years. "The spare room is yours for as long as you need it," Gran said, standing to return to her bread dough. "And Olivia's coming for the weekend. We'll figure everything out together." Maya watched as her grandmother resumed kneading, her movements rhythmic and soothing. There was something timeless about the scene. A woman making bread in a warm kitchen, the scent of yeast and flour mingling in the air. It represented continuity, the simple acts that connected generations. "Thank you," Maya whispered, though she wasn't sure if Gran heard her. Later that night, lying in the twin bed of her childhood room, Maya called James. The conversation was brief and surprisingly devoid of drama. He sounded resigned, as if he'd been expecting this call for months. Perhaps he had been. When she told him about the cancer, his voice cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion he'd shown in their conversation. "I'm sorry," he said. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Maya replied. "I just thought you should know." He asked if she wanted him to come to Lakeside, and she said no. He asked if she needed money for treatments, and again she declined. Their health insurance would cover most of the costs, and Gran had been prudent with her savings. By the time they said goodbye, Maya felt a curious sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The marriage that had once been the center of her world now seemed like a distant memory, a chapter closing quietly without fanfare or regret. The first round of chemotherapy came 3 weeks after Maya's surgery. The procedure had gone well, clean margins, the doctor said, though the cancer had spread to 3 lymph nodes. She had opted for a double mastectomy, a decision that some might have considered extreme, but that gave her a sense of control in a situation where control was largely illusory. Olivia drove her to the treatment center, a modern facility attached to the regional hospital. The infusion room was designed to be comforting, with recliners arranged in a semicircle facing large windows that overlooked a garden. But nothing could fully disguise its clinical purpose. As the nurse inserted the 4-line, Maya closed her eyes, trying to center herself. She had prepared for this moment, read articles, joined online support groups, spoken with her oncologist about what to expect. But knowledge she was discovering offered limited protection against fear. "You okay?" Olivia asked, sitting beside her with a book open on her lap. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. The medication began to flow into her veins, cool at first, then warm. She imagined it spreading through her body, seeking out and destroying the rogue cells that threatened her life. It was a hopeful visualization, one recommended by the hospital's psychologist. "Tell me about your latest project," Maya said after a while, needing distraction from the growing awareness of chemicals entering her bloodstream. Olivia was an architectural preservationist, specializing in the restoration of historic buildings. Her passion for saving old structures had led her across the country and occasionally overseas, documenting and preserving pieces of history that might otherwise be lost to time and neglect. "I'm consulting on the renovation of the old Harrington Hotel," Olivia replied, her face lighting up. "You remember it? The Victorian monstrosity on Main Street that's been empty for decades." Maya did remember. As teenagers, they had snuck into the abandoned hotel on a dare, tiptoeing through dust-covered hallways and peeking into rooms where the past seemed to linger like a faint perfume. "They're turning it into apartments?" she guessed. "Mixed use," Olivia corrected. "Retail on the ground floor, apartments above, and they're restoring the ballroom for events. The original crown moldings are still intact in most rooms, and we discovered this incredible mosaic floor under layers of linoleum in what used to be the lobby." As Olivia continued describing the project, Maya felt herself relax slightly. There was something reassuring about plans for the future, about the assumption that life would continue, that buildings would be restored, that history would be preserved. "You should come see it when you're feeling up to it," Olivia suggested. "The main staircase is being reinstalled next week. It's magnificent, solid oak with hand-carved balusters." "I'd like that," Maya said, meaning it. The first treatment session lasted 3 hours. By the end, Maya felt oddly normal, tired, but not dramatically different than when she'd arrived. The real effects she knew would come later. Sure enough, by the next morning, nausea had settled into her stomach like a persistent, uninvited guest. Her bones ached, and a peculiar metallic taste coated her tongue, making everything she ate taste wrong. But she forced herself to drink water and nibble on saltine crackers, knowing that hydration and small amounts of food would help. Gran hovered nearby, trying not to be obvious in her concern but unable to keep herself from checking on Maya every half hour. She brought ginger tea and cool compresses, adjusted pillows, and read aloud from the newspaper, her voice a steady backdrop to Maya's discomfort. By the 3rd day, the worst of the side effects had begun to recede, leaving behind a deep fatigue that made even simple tasks feel monumental. Maya spent hours staring out the window of her bedroom, watching the patterns of light shift across the lake as clouds passed overhead. It was during one of these quiet moments that she first saw him. A man standing on the public dock, easel set up before him, paintbrush moving with confident strokes across the canvas. He was too far away for Maya to make out his features clearly, but something about his solitary figure against the expansive backdrop of water and sky captured her attention. He returned the next day and the day after that. Always to the same spot, always alone. Maya found herself looking for him, measuring the passage of time by his arrivals and departures. It was silly, she knew, this fixation on a stranger, but it gave her something to focus on besides her illness. "Who's the artist at the dock?" she finally asked Gran over dinner, trying to sound casual. Gran glanced out the window, though the dock wasn't visible from the kitchen. "That's Elijah Cooper. Moved here about a year ago. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's been teaching art classes at the community center on Thursday evenings." "Is he any good?" Maya asked, pushing her barely touched meal around her plate. "Very," Gran replied with a knowing smile. "He had a showing at the library last fall. Landscapes mostly, though there were a few portraits that caught everyone's attention. He captures something essential about his subjects." Maya nodded, filing away this information. She wasn't sure why she was interested. She hadn't felt drawn to anyone since her marriage began its slow collapse, but there was something compelling about a person who could stand in the same spot day after day, finding new beauty in familiar scenes. "You should introduce yourself," Gran suggested, too perceptive as always. "You used to love painting." It was true. Before college, before her career in public relations, before James, Maya had painted. Nothing gallery-worthy, but she had found joy in the process. In mixing colors and applying them to canvas. In trying to capture the world as she saw it. "Maybe I will," she said, though she had no real intention of doing so. Her hair was already beginning to thin, and fatigue had carved shadows beneath her eyes. She wasn't ready to meet new people, especially not an attractive artist who would surely see the illness written all over her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, Maya felt well enough to attempt a short walk. It was mid-morning. The sun high enough to warm the air but not yet at its peak intensity. She followed the path from Gran's property down to the lakeshore, moving slowly, aware of every step. The public dock was empty when she arrived, and she felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. She sat on a weathered bench near the water's edge, closing her eyes and turning her face toward the sun, absorbing its warmth like a neglected houseplant finally returned to light. "Mind if I join you?" The voice startled her. Maya opened her eyes to find the artist, Elijah, standing a few feet away, a canvas tucked under one arm and a small tackle box of supplies in his other hand. Up close, he was older than she had imagined, probably in his mid-40s, with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples. His face was weathered in a way that suggested years spent outdoors, with laugh lines framing eyes the color of the lake on a clear day. "It's a public bench," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. He sat, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I've seen you watching from the house on the hill," he said, setting his supplies beside him. "I was beginning to think you might be a ghost." Maya raised an eyebrow. "And if I were? I'd still ask to paint you," he answered with a slight smile. "Some of the most interesting faces belong to those who've seen beyond the veil." Despite herself, Maya laughed. It was an unexpectedly poetic response, and not at all what she had anticipated from their first interaction. "I'm Maya," she said, "and I'm not a ghost, just temporarily haunting my grandmother's house." "Elijah Cooper," he introduced himself, extending a hand. When she took it, his grip was firm but gentle, his palm calloused in places where brushes and palette knives had left their mark. An artist's hands, she thought. "Eleanor's granddaughter." He nodded in recognition. "She speaks highly of you." Maya felt a flicker of embarrassment, wondering what Gran had told him. "She's biased," she deflected. "Grandmothers usually are." "Maybe," Elijah conceded. "But she mentioned you were a painter once. That makes us kindred spirits of sorts." "I was an amateur at best," Maya said, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing serious." Elijah studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful rather than intrusive. "Seriousness is overrated in art," he finally said. "Some of the most truthful work comes from those who paint without the burden of expectations." There was something engaging about his perspective, a quiet confidence that wasn't arrogant but rather deeply rooted in experience. Maya found herself wanting to continue the conversation, despite her earlier reservations. "What are you working on?" she asked, nodding toward the canvas under his arm. He held it up for her inspection. It was a scene of the lake at dawn, with mist rising from the water's surface and the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees on the eastern shore. The colors were subdued but luminous, soft grays and blues giving way to gentle pinks and golds where the light touched the water. "It's beautiful," Maya said, genuinely impressed. "You've captured exactly how it feels to be here in those quiet morning moments." "That's the highest compliment," Elijah replied, looking pleased. "I'm not interested in photographic accuracy. I want to paint how places feel." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing easily from art to the history of Lakeside to their respective backgrounds. Elijah had been a commercial illustrator in Chicago before moving to the small town after his divorce. He now split his time between commission work, his own projects, and teaching. Maya was vaguer about her current circumstances, saying only that she was taking a break from her career in PR to deal with health issues. If Elijah noticed her careful language, he didn't press for details. "I should get back," she said eventually, aware that her energy was waning. "Gran will start to worry." Elijah nodded, gathering his supplies. "Will you be walking tomorrow?" he asked. "I could bring some sketches of the old boathouse before they tear it down next month. Eleanor mentioned you spent summers there as a child." The invitation was casual, friendly rather than romantic, but Maya hesitated nonetheless. Starting any kind of relationship, even a platonic one, seemed unwise given her circumstances. And yet, the prospect of having something to look forward to besides treatments and side effects was undeniably appealing. "Same time," she found herself saying. "I can't promise to be good company, but I'd like to see those sketches." "Same time," he confirmed with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. As Maya walked back up the hill to Gran's house, she felt a curious lightness in her step that had nothing to do with her physical condition. For the first time since her diagnosis, she had made plans that weren't related to her illness, a small act of defiance against the disease that had hijacked her life. Gran was working in her garden when Maya returned, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun as she deadhead spent flowers with precise snips of her pruning shears. "Had a nice chat with Elijah, I see," she remarked, not looking up from her task. Maya shouldn't have been surprised by her grandmother's awareness. Little escaped her notice, especially when it came to her granddaughters. "He seems interesting," Maya admitted. "Different from most people in town." "He is that," Gran agreed. "Turned down a commission from the mayor's wife, because he said he couldn't in good conscience paint her obnoxious Pomeranian looking dignified." She chuckled at the memory. "Cost him a pretty penny, but earned him my respect." Maya smiled, imagining the scene. It was refreshing to think of someone prioritizing artistic integrity over financial gain, especially in a small town where connections and reputations mattered. "We're meeting again tomorrow," she said, helping Gran up from her kneeling position on the garden path. "Just to talk about art." Gran gave her a sidelong glance. "You don't need to justify friendship to me, Maya. Especially not now. Connection is healing." Later that evening, as Maya sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass like embers, her phone buzzed with a text from James. It was the first contact since their call 3 weeks ago. "Signing the papers tomorrow. Taking only what's mine. House is yours when you're ready. Hope treatment is going okay." The message was typical James, practical, straightforward, devoid of unnecessary emotion. Maya stared at it for a long moment before typing her response. "Thank you. Wishing you well." 7 years of marriage reduced to a brief exchange of texts. There should have been more to say, more to feel. But the truth was, they had said everything that mattered long ago. In the silences between them, in the growing distance, in the separate lives they had constructed under the same roof. Maya set her phone aside and returned her gaze to the darkening landscape before her. A chapter was ending, yes. But perhaps unexpectedly, another was beginning. The days fell into a pattern. Chemo treatments, followed by days of recovery, gradually improving until the next round knocked her back again. Maya lost her hair in patches at first, then completely. She mourned its loss privately, crying in the shower as clumps washed down the drain. before emerging with a determined smile for Gran and Olivia. Through it all, her meetings with Elijah continued. They weren't daily. He respected her need for solitude on her worst days, but they became a constant in a life otherwise defined by unpredictability. Sometimes they walked slowly along the lakeshore. Sometimes they sat on the dock with sketchbooks open on their laps. And sometimes, when Maya lacked the energy for either, they simply sat on Gran's porch, talking as the sun moved across the sky. Elijah never asked directly about her illness, taking his cues from her. On days when she wore a scarf wrapped around her bare scalp, he commented on the pattern or color. On days when she moved with pain evident in every step, he shortened their walks without making it obvious he was doing so. His tact, his willingness to engage with her as a whole person rather than a patient, became a lifeline Maya hadn't known she needed. "I'm starting a new project," he told her one afternoon in late summer, as they sat beneath the sprawling oak tree in Gran's backyard. "A series of portraits, people of Lakeside. Would you consider sitting for me?" Maya looked at him in surprise. "Me? I'm hardly representative of Lakeside right now." She gestured vaguely at herself, thinner than she had ever been, complexion sallow despite the time spent outdoors, eyes seeming too large for her face without the frame of her once thick hair. Elijah's expression remained earnest. "You're exactly what I want to capture: strength and transition. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "you have extraordinary bone structure. Artists dream of subjects with such clear lines." The compliment, delivered with matter-of-fact appreciation rather than pity, warmed something inside her that had grown cold. "When would you want to do this?" she asked, not quite agreeing but not refusing either. "Whenever you feel up to it. No rush. The project will take months." Maya considered his offer. Part of her recoiled at the thought of being documented in her current state, of having her illness rendered in oils or acrylics for others to see. But another part, a stronger part, recognized the opportunity for what it was: a chance to reclaim her image, to see herself through the eyes of someone who seemed to recognize her essential self beneath the physical changes. "Okay," she said finally, "but I get to see it before anyone else does. And if I hate it, you can't include it in the series." Elijah nodded solemnly. "Fair terms. Though I should warn you, I don't paint flattering lies, but I do paint truth as compassionately as possible." They began the following week, setting up in the sunroom at the back of Gran's house. The space had good northern light, filtered through tall windows that overlooked the garden. Elijah brought his own easel and supplies, arranging everything with practiced efficiency. "Just sit naturally," he instructed, indicating a comfortable chair positioned near the windows. "We'll talk while I work. The best portraits happen when the subject forgets they're being observed." Maya settled into the chair, feeling awkward at first, too aware of her posture and expression. But as Elijah began to sketch, his questions drew her out of self-consciousness. "Tell me about your work in PR," he said, eyes moving between her face and his canvas. "What drew you to it?" The question was innocuous but thoughtful, and Maya found herself considering it seriously. "I like the challenge of shaping narratives," she replied after a moment. "Finding the story within the facts and presenting it in a way that resonates with people." "Not so different from painting," Elijah observed, his hand moving in quick, sure strokes. "I suppose not," Maya agreed, "though I suspect you have more freedom to interpret truth than I did. In PR, you have to work within strict parameters of what's provable. And yet, two PR professionals might present the same facts quite differently," he countered. "There's artistry in that selection process." The conversation continued in this vein, philosophical without being pretentious, probing without being invasive. Maya gradually relaxed into it, forgetting the canvas between them as they discussed creativity, authenticity, and the ways people present themselves to the world. When Elijah finally set down his brush nearly 2 hours later, Maya was surprised by how quickly the time had passed. "That's enough for today," he said, stretching his shoulders. "You're a natural sitter, present but not rigid." "Can I see?" Maya asked, curious despite her earlier apprehension. Elijah hesitated. "It's just the underlayer today, establishing composition and basic forms. Not much to see yet. I'd rather you wait until there's something worth showing." Maya nodded, accepting his artistic process. Same time next week? If you're feeling up to it, he agreed, already cleaning his brushes with practiced movements. The portrait sessions became another fixture in Maya's new routine, something to anticipate rather than dread. As summer gave way to fall, she found herself thinking of her life, not in terms of treatment cycles but in moments. Morning coffee with Gran on the porch, weekly video calls with Olivia, who had returned to her preservation project, afternoon walks with Elijah that grew shorter as the days cooled, and portrait sessions in the sunroom, where conversations ranged from the mundane to the profound. It was during one such session, as October painted the landscape in fiery hues that reflected in the lake like fallen stars, that Maya first confessed her fears about the future. I keep thinking about what happens after, she said, watching Elijah mix colors on his palette. If the treatment works, when the treatment works, she corrected herself. What then? My marriage is over. My career feels distant and unimportant now. It's like I'm being reborn into a life I haven't designed yet. Elijah considered her words, applying a careful stroke to the canvas before responding. Most significant change happens that way, I think. We rarely get to design our transformations in advance. Does that mean I just wait to see what emerges? Maya asked, genuinely seeking his perspective. That feels passive somehow. Not passive, Elijah countered. Receptive. There's a difference. Receptivity requires its own kind of courage. The willingness to remain open to possibilities you couldn't have imagined before. Maya mulled this over. Is that what happened with you? After your divorce? Elijah's hand paused briefly before continuing its work. In a way, he acknowledged. I had a specific vision of my life. Successful career in Chicago. Marriage to my college sweetheart. Eventually children and a brownstone with a studio. When half of that equation disappeared, I clung to the career portion even more tightly. It took a medical scare of my own to make me reassess what actually mattered. This was new information. In all their conversations, Elijah had never mentioned health problems. What happened? Maya asked gently. Heart attack at 41, he replied, his tone matter of fact. Minor, as these things go, but a wake-up call nonetheless. Stress, poor diet, working 18-hour days, classic recipe for disaster. My doctor was blunt. Change or prepare for a shorter life than planned. So you moved here, Maya surmised. Dramatic change. Elijah nodded. Terrifying change. I knew no one. Had no connections. Had to rebuild my client base entirely. But it was necessary. He stepped back from the canvas, assessing his work with a critical eye. The point is, I couldn't have planned the life I have now. I had to be open to its emergence. Something in his words resonated deeply with Maya. She had always been a planner, setting goals, creating timelines, measuring success by objectives met. Cancer had disrupted that approach entirely, forcing her into a present moment that sometimes felt unbearably acute, and other times strangely liberating. I think we're done for today, Elijah said, setting down his brush. The light's changing. Maya realized that shadows had indeed lengthened across the sunroom floor, the golden afternoon light giving way to the cooler blue of approaching evening. Will you show me now? She asked. It's been weeks. Elijah seemed to deliberate internally before nodding. It's not complete, he cautioned. But yes, I think it's time you saw it. He turned the easel toward her, and Maya found herself looking at herself. But not as she saw herself in mirrors. Not the gaunt face and hollow eyes that had become familiar. Elijah had captured something else entirely. A woman with unmistakable physical fragility, but also unmistakable inner strength. Her painted eyes held a quiet determination, and though her features showed the effects of illness, they also showed resilience. Most striking was the background. Not the sunroom as Maya had expected, but a stylized rendering of the lake at dawn, with the same misty light Elijah had captured in the painting he'd shown her months ago. It created an ethereal quality, as if Maya existed in a liminal space between worlds. What do you think? Elijah asked, watching her reaction closely. Maya felt tears well in her eyes. But they weren't tears of dismay or self-pity. They were tears of recognition, of seeing herself as both vulnerable and powerful, of being witnessed in her full humanity. It's true, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, but true. Elijah's expression softened. The most authentic beauty never is conventional, he said quietly. It's particular, specific to the individual. Your beauty now is different from what it was before your illness, but no less real. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that extended beyond the portrait. Maya felt something shift in her chest. A loosening of the armor she had maintained even with Elijah. A willingness to be seen not just as a cancer patient or a woman in transition, but as herself in all her complexity. Thank you, she said simply. Elijah nodded, understanding the depth behind her gratitude. Same time next week? He asked, reverting to their usual parting question. Same time, Maya confirmed. As he packed up his supplies, Maya remained seated, studying the portrait that both was and wasn't her. She wondered what the finished version would reveal. What aspects of herself were still emerging that even she couldn't yet see. Winter came early to Lakeside that year, the first snow falling before Thanksgiving. Maya's treatments continued, though the worst of the side effects had begun to subside as her body adapted to the chemical assault. Her hair was returning in patches, soft as down and surprisingly dark, as if the new growth had forgotten the auburn highlights she'd had for years. The divorce was finalized with little fanfare. James had been fair in the settlement, even generous. He had written her a letter that arrived with the final paperwork, not an attempt to reconcile, but a genuine acknowledgement of their shared history and his wishes for her recovery. Maya had read it once, then tucked it away in her desk drawer, a relic of a life that already seemed to belong to someone else. Your hair's coming back nicely, Gran commented one morning in early December as they sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in the comforting aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg from the oatmeal she had prepared. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, adding to the thick blanket that already covered the garden. Maya ran a self-conscious hand over her scalp. The new growth was barely an inch long, but it was everywhere now, creating a soft shadow where once there had been nothing. It's different, she said. Darker. Your mother's hair changed after she had you, Gran replied, pouring more tea. Went from straight to wavy. Bodies have their own wisdom after trauma. The observation lingered with Maya throughout the day. Bodies have their own wisdom. Perhaps hers was telling her something with this new, darker growth, that she wasn't the same person who had been diagnosed 10 months ago. That transformation went deeper than losing and regaining physical attributes. Her final chemotherapy session was scheduled for the week before Christmas. Dr. Patel, her oncologist, had been cautiously optimistic at her last appointment. The tumor markers are trending in the right direction, she had said, reviewing Maya's charts with practiced efficiency. And the imaging studies show significant reduction. We'll do a full workup after you complete the regimen, but I'm pleased with your progress. Progress. Such a clinical term for the grueling journey Maya had endured. The days spent curled around a basin, the nights when even her bones seemed to ache, the moments when the reflection in the mirror belonged to a stranger. But there had been unexpected gifts along the way too. Gran's unwavering presence, Olivia's fierce advocacy, and Elijah, whose friendship had bloomed like a winter rose, improbable but undeniable. The portrait sessions had continued throughout her treatment, evolving as Maya herself evolved. Sometimes they lasted only half an hour when her energy flagged. Other times they stretched into the afternoon, punctuated by laughter and occasional tears as conversations delved into memories, hopes, fears. Elijah had refused to show her the portrait again after that first reveal, insisting that he was still refining it, still discovering its truth. Maya had respected his process, trusting that whatever emerged would reflect not just who she had been during this difficult time, but who she was becoming. 3 days before her final treatment, Elijah arrived at Gran's house with an unusual request. I want to take you somewhere, he said, standing on the porch with snow melting on his shoulders. If you're feeling up to it. Maya eyed him curiously. Where? It's a surprise, he replied with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Dress warmly. After a moment's consideration, Maya nodded. Give me 5 minutes. Gran watched from the kitchen window as Maya, bundled in her warmest coat and a knitted hat Olivia had sent, followed Elijah to his well-worn Subaru. Don't worry, Maya had reassured her. I've got my phone and enough energy for an adventure. The adventure, it turned out, was a drive to the other side of the lake, where the old Harrington Hotel stood in the midst of renovation. Scaffolding wrapped its Victorian facade, and the sound of power tools greeted them as Elijah parked in what would eventually be the hotel's new lot. "Why are we here?" Maya asked, confused. "Your sister's project," Elijah explained, helping her navigate a path through the snow. "She mentioned you hadn't seen it yet, and I thought you might like to see what she's been working on. I've been doing some consulting on the historic paint colors." The gesture touched Maya deeply. This thoughtful connection between her past conversations and present experience. As they entered through a side door, bypassing the active construction at the main entrance, the noise of machinery faded, replaced by the particular silence of a grand old building in transition. "It's amazing," Maya breathed, taking in the soaring ceilings of what had once been the hotel's famed ballroom. Sheets protected restored patches of ornate plasterwork, and the original chandeliers, removed, restored, and now reinstalled, hung like crystalline clouds above them. "Your sister has remarkable vision," Elijah said, guiding her through the space. "She insisted they save these original floors despite the cost. Said there were dance steps worn into them that deserved to be preserved." Maya smiled, recognizing Olivia's typical blend of romanticism and historical appreciation. They moved through the building slowly, Elijah pointing out original features that were being restored and modern additions designed to complement, rather than compete with the historic elements. In what had once been the hotel's library, now destined to become a cozy lounge for residents, Elijah paused. "There's something else I wanted to show you," he said, a note of hesitation in his voice that Maya hadn't heard before. From his coat pocket, he produced a small key, which he used to unlock a door marked private. Beyond it lay a narrow staircase leading to the hotel's former conservatory, a glass-enclosed space on the third floor that afforded breathtaking views of the lake and surrounding mountains. "This isn't part of the tour," Maya said, raising an eyebrow as she followed him up the stairs. "No," Elijah agreed. "This is something else entirely." The conservatory was empty of construction materials, its glass panes clean to transparency, allowing winter light to flood the space. But what drew Maya's attention immediately were the canvases arranged around the circular room. Dozens of them, each capturing a different aspect of Lakeside through the seasons. There were familiar views of the dock where she had first spoken to Elijah, studies of the ancient oak in Grand's yard, vignettes of town life rendered in his distinctive style that privileged emotional resonance over photographic accuracy. And then she saw it, her portrait, placed on an easel in the center of the room as if it were the focal point around which all other works revolved. "Elijah," she whispered, moving toward it with tentative steps. "What is this?" He remained near the door, giving her space to absorb what she was seeing. "It's my new studio," he explained, "and gallery. Olivia helped me secure the lease when she learned the space wasn't going to be used in the hotel's redevelopment. I move in officially after the new year." Maya circled the portrait slowly, taking in the finished version. Elijah had refined it since she'd last seen it, deepening the colors and adding subtle details that enhanced its emotional impact. The liminal quality remained, herself suspended between states, between identities, but there was something new as well, a sense of forward momentum, of emergence, captured in the way light seemed to gather around her figure. "It's called becoming," Elijah said softly, finally approaching to stand beside her. "If you still don't want it displayed, I'll respect that. But I hoped." He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. "You hoped what?" Maya prompted, still absorbing the way he had seen her, had painted her, with such profound recognition. "I hoped you might see what I see," he finished simply. A woman of extraordinary courage, facing transformation with grace. Maya felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. Tears had been too frequent a companion during her illness. Now she wanted clarity to absorb this moment fully. "The show opens in February," Elijah continued, "when Olivia returns for the hotel's ribbon cutting. I understand if you're not ready for this level of vulnerability in public, but—" "Yes," Maya interrupted, surprising herself with the immediacy of her decision. "Yes, I want it displayed." Elijah's expression registered both joy and relief. "Are you sure? You don't need to decide right now." Maya turned back to the portrait, studying the woman she had been these past months, and the woman she was becoming. The two weren't separate, she realized. One hadn't replaced the other. Rather, they existed in continuity, threads of the same unfolding story. I'm sure, she said firmly. This is part of my story now. I don't want to hide it. They stayed in the conservatory for another hour. Elijah showing her other pieces planned for the exhibition, Maya offering her impressions with the frankness their friendship had always encouraged. As the winter light began to fade, casting long shadows across the gleaming floors, Maya found herself reluctant to leave this magical space, suspended above the ordinary world. We should go, Elijah said eventually, noting her increasing fatigue despite her interest. Your grandmother will be worried. The drive back to Grand's was quiet, both of them wrapped in their thoughts. When they arrived, Elijah walked her to the door, but declined Grand's invitation to stay for dinner. Another time, he promised. I have some work to finish tonight. As Maya watched his car disappear down the snowy driveway, she felt a curious mixture of emotion: gratitude for his friendship, appreciation for his artistic vision, and something else, something newer and more tentative that she wasn't quite ready to name. He's a good man, Gran observed from behind her. Sees people truly. Maya nodded, unable to disagree. Yes, she said simply. He does. The final chemotherapy session arrived with a sense of ceremonial significance. Olivia flew in for the occasion, bringing with her a small bell that patients traditionally rang at the cancer center to mark the completion of their treatment journey. It's supposed to be good luck, she explained, handing it to Maya as they sat in the now familiar infusion room. 3 rings for past, present, and future. Maya turned the brass bell over in her hands, feeling its solid weight. Seems a bit theatrical, she murmured, though she was touched by the gesture. Sometimes theater helps us process reality, Olivia replied with the insightfulness that had always been her hallmark. Rituals give shape to experiences that might otherwise overwhelm us. As the final medications dripped into her veins, Maya reflected on the ritual aspects of the past year, the cyclical nature of treatment and recovery, the patterns that had emerged in her new life. There had been a liturgy to her illness, a rhythm of suffering and resilience that had taught her things about herself she might never have discovered otherwise. When the nurse removed the 4 for the final time, Olivia nudged the bell toward her. With a self-conscious smile, Maya stood and rang it 3 times, each clear note echoing through the infusion room. The sound seemed to mark a threshold. Not an ending exactly, but a transition to whatever came next. Now what? Olivia asked as they drove back to Grand's house, snow falling in thick flakes that muffled the world around them. Maya gazed out the window at the transformed landscape. Now we wait, she said. More tests. More monitoring. Cancer doesn't end with a bell ceremony. I meant beyond that, Olivia clarified. Are you staying in Lakeside? Going back to the city? What do you want your life to look like now? It was the question Maya had been asking herself with increasing frequency as her treatment neared its end. The house she had shared with James was hers now, but the thought of returning to it held no appeal. Her career in PR seemed distant, belonging to a version of herself that no longer existed. And yet, she wasn't sure what should replace these former anchors of her identity. I don't know yet, she admitted. But I think I might stay here a while longer. Start painting again, maybe. Olivia glanced at her with evident surprise. Painting? You haven't mentioned that in years. I know, Maya acknowledged. But being around Elijah's work has reminded me how much I used to love it. Not for the results necessarily, but for the process, the way time disappears when you're trying to capture light on water or the exact shade of a winter sky. Speaking of Elijah, Olivia began with studied casualness. Gran says you two have gotten close. Maya felt a flush that had nothing to do with her medication. We've become friends, she said carefully. He's been an unexpected gift during all this. Seeing me as more than my illness when that's all I could see in myself. Just friends. Olivia pressed, navigating the car around a curve in the snow-covered road with practiced ease. For now, Maya replied after a thoughtful pause, I'm not ready for more than that yet. I'm still figuring out who I am post-cancer, post-marriage. But yes, there's something there. Something worth exploring when the time is right. Olivia nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. Well, when you're ready, he seems like someone who would be worth the risk. Worth the risk. The phrase stayed with Maya through the holidays that followed. Christmas with Gran and Olivia, quiet and intimate compared to the elaborate celebration she and James had hosted in previous years, but somehow more meaningful for its simplicity. Elijah joined them for Christmas dinner, bringing a small painting for each of them. Individualized gifts that demonstrated how closely he had observed their preferences and personalities. For Gran, he had painted her beloved garden in full summer bloom. For Olivia, a detailed rendering of the Harrington Hotel as it would appear when fully restored. And for Maya, a small study of the dock at dawn, with the first light breaking across the water, a reminder of beginnings. As January unfolded with bitter cold and crystalline beauty, Maya's strength continued to return gradually. The post-treatment scan showed no evidence of disease, though Dr. Patel was careful to emphasize the need for ongoing vigilance. 5 years, she reminded Maya during her follow-up appointment. That's when we use the word cured. Until then, we monitor and we hope. Hope had become a familiar companion, less flashy than despair but more sustaining. Maya found herself making plans again, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence. She enrolled in an online course in digital marketing, thinking her PR skills might translate well to remote work that would allow her to stay in Lakeside. She cleared out one of the spare bedrooms in Gran's house and set it up as a small studio, investing in brushes, paints, and canvases with the joyful anticipation of a child preparing for an adventure. And she spent time with Elijah, walking when weather permitted, visiting his new studio as it took shape, sharing meals and conversations that grew increasingly personal. They were circling something profound, both aware of it but neither pushing for definition before Maya felt ready. The night before Elijah's gallery opening in early February, a heavy snowstorm blanketed Lakeside in white silence. Maya stood at her bedroom window watching fat flakes swirl in the glow of the porch light, when her phone buzzed with a text. Still awake? Elijah had written. Can't sleep, she replied. Nervous about tomorrow. Come outside. Maya frowned at the screen, then peered more intently through her window. There, standing in Gran's driveway with snow gathering on his shoulders, was Elijah. She pulled on boots and her heavy coat, wrapping a scarf around her neck before slipping quietly downstairs and out the front door. What are you doing here? She asked, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. It's past midnight. Elijah smiled, snowflakes catching in his eyelashes. I wanted to give you something before tomorrow, when it will be just us, not a room full of gallery visitors. From inside his coat, he produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with simple twine. Open it, he urged. Maya untied the string with gloved fingers and carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of intertwining vines. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a necklace, a pendant suspended on a delicate silver chain. The pendant itself was unlike anything Maya had seen before. A small glass orb containing what appeared to be layers of pigment, blues and purples and golds that seemed to shift and blend as she moved it in the porch light. What is it? She asked, entranced. It's a collaboration, Elijah explained. I worked with a glassblower in town, Sam Weber, you've probably met him, to encapsulate some of the paint I use for your portrait. The exact colors I mixed to capture the light on the lake that day, and the light illuminating you. The thoughtfulness of the gift momentarily robbed Maya of speech. She turned the pendant in her hand, watching as the colors seemed to dance within their glass prison. It's beautiful, she finally managed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Elijah replied, his expression earnest in the soft light. I just wanted you to have something that represents what I see when I look at you. Layers of color and light, constantly changing but always essentially you. Maya looked up at him, this man who had entered her life at its most vulnerable point and somehow helped her find beauty in her brokenness. Without overthinking, she stepped forward and kissed him. A gentle press of lips that carried with it all the gratitude and affection and, yes, love that had been growing between them over these many months. When she pulled back, his eyes remained closed for a moment, as if preserving the sensation. When they opened, they held a question. I'm ready, Maya said simply, answering what he hadn't asked aloud. For whatever comes next. With you if that's what you want to. Elijah's smile was like sunrise breaking across the lake. It is, he confirmed, taking her hands in his. It has been for a while now. They stood together in the falling snow, two figures finding each other at the intersection of ending and beginning, loss and discovery, winter and the promise of spring. Maya knew there would be challenges ahead. Her health remained uncertain, their relationship new and untested, the future unwritten. But for the first time since her diagnosis, uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like an invitation. "Will you help me put it on?" she asked, holding out the necklace. Elijah nodded, taking the delicate chain and moving to stand behind her. As he fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushed against her skin with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The pendant came to rest just above her heart, a perfect placement for this symbol of transformation. "There," he said softly. "It belongs with you." Maya touched the glass orb, feeling its weight, substantial but not heavy, much like the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this, but for seeing me through everything." "That's what artists do," Elijah replied with characteristic humility. "We see what's already there, waiting to be recognized." As they walked hand in hand toward Gran's porch, the snow continued to fall around them, erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. Maya thought about impermanence, about how life insisted on change regardless of our attempts to prevent it. Cancer had taught her that resistance only prolonged suffering. Acceptance, not of defeat but of transformation, was the path toward peace. Tomorrow, strangers would view her portrait, seeing her at her most vulnerable. Paradoxically, the thought no longer frightened her. The woman in that painting was indeed her. Not her entire story, but an essential chapter in it. And the woman standing here now, with new hair growing and hope blooming and love unfolding, was also her. The next chapter already being written. "Stay for breakfast?" she asked as they reached the door. "Gran makes cinnamon rolls on special occasions." "And what's the occasion?" Elijah asked, the corner of his mouth lifting in a smile. Maya considered the question, looking out at the transformed landscape, the familiar world made new by winter's quiet artistry. "Beginning again," she said simply. "Beginning again." As they entered the warm house together, Maya felt the pendant shift against her skin. Colors in motion, never static, always becoming. Like the lake that had witnessed her journey, like the light that had illuminated her transformation, like life itself with all its shadows and brilliance. An ongoing creation, imperfect and beautiful and entirely her own.